one of the very innocuous, very innocent questions that was asked of me by the post producer was, "You're comfortable with Avid, right?" "Yeah, sure, no problem." I hadn't talked about Avid in 10 years. Similar to you, I only was an assistant editor for 5 months of my whole career, which I want to learn a little bit more about, because as you know, people say, I'm sure they ask you all the time, how do I get into scripted? Well, I've been told that I have to take a step back and be an assistant. And I'm just always like, no, you don't. There isn't one way to get in the door, and you clearly embody that you don't have to be an assistant first. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
I completely agree. You know, it's funny, like the key takeaway, just to wrap up what I was saying, the key takeaway for me from that was that, you know, I just never told anybody that I couldn't do it. I felt like that was a piece of information that was not worth offering to people. Like, you know, until the point that somebody would come along, nobody, thank God, I mean, you know, nobody ever asked. So like, hey, you know how to do this, right? Before we hire you. Like, it's stunning to me, even today, how infrequently people ask simple, like direct, short questions like that. They're like, hey, so by the way, you've edited a half-hour show before, right? Or any narrative content show before. I, you know, worked on a show at some point with an editor who got hired, who had never done a half hour, who had never done a 1 hour, and who had never done, had never worked on Avid, but he got the job. You know, he just didn't tell anybody he couldn't do it, which is like, you know, stunning. But you also have to be careful. I mean, one of the great pieces of advice I was given by one of my mentors was to be careful that you don't let your, so smart, I wish I talked like this more, was to be careful that you don't let your success lead your skill level. You know, you want to make sure that your skill level is ahead of your success, or at least like commensurate. You don't want to like suddenly be succeeding and getting like opportunities. I mean, an example that I say, you know, this is my example for everything, but it's like, suppose I got a call tomorrow, right? To be like, hey, this is maybe not a great example, but like, I got a job offer to be the DP on the new Star Wars movie, right? Like for a second, you'd be like, oh my God, that's awesome. But I'd be like, I do not know how to do that job, you know? And there are people in the industry who will say, yes, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna do that job, and I'll figure it out as I go. But the opportunity for failure is so much greater there than the opportunity for success. And not just, you know, screwing up the job, but also then like, all the people who were involved in hiring you knowing that you screwed it up, that you weren't prepared, you weren't ready. And that is very hard to erase over the next several years as you're trying to figure out, go back down to whatever level you were at or should be at, or where, you know, you feel comfortable. And, you know, that you got to tell people. You got to tell people that you did that and that you failed. And like, there's nothing wrong with failing, but it's hard to recover from, you know, reputation-wise.
Agreed. And one of the things that I talk about with the students in my coaching and mentorship program, because there's an opposite side to this that's very dangerous, which is perfectionism. Oh, I'm just not ready yet. I have to wait until I'm quote unquote ready, which means they're overly prepared. And what I always explain to them is you need to set yourself up for success on day one, meaning do you know just enough to not drown on day one and be in a position to figure everything else out. You being a DP on Star Wars, massive failure. You walk in and you're like, what's a gel? What's a crane? Like, what are you talking about? Who is this guy? But as an editor or as somebody that was your own assistant, like I know the one of the transitions that I made that I've talked about many times is the time that I transitioned into TV on Burn Notice. And one of the
was that your transition point right there?
My transition. So according to everybody and looking at my resume, that was my overnight success story, right? It took 10 years, but that was my overnight success story. But one of the very innocuous, very innocent questions that was asked of me by the post producer was, "You're comfortable with Avid, right?" "Yeah, sure, no problem." I hadn't talked about Avid in 10 years. But I had been all Final Cut, and this was the original Final Cut, not the newfangled Final Cut X version. Right. But I knew and I believed in my ability to figure it out. Yes. They weren't hiring me because I was an Avid technician. I was confident I could tell their story. I knew their show. Could I use the tools? It was going to be a couple weeks. It was going to be pretty bumpy. And one of the things I remember, very distinct memory, is that the assistant editor that they had assigned me at the time thought that he was probably going to get that spot that I ended up getting to fill in.
Interesting.
So that this young kid with no scripted credit at all, that's now in the editor's chair, my first week I walk into my assistant and I say, "Can you show me how to make an audio keyframe?" And just the look on his face, like, are you kidding me? But I knew that all the little stuff I could figure out, but I had the confidence in my skill set to cut the show and tell the story. So as long as you can set yourself up for success to not fail on day one, you can learn the rest of it. But I don't want people to fall into the trap of, yeah, but I'm not ready yet, right? Because like for you, you just jump into things and you figure things out.